evening. I am Gregory Westner. I am the Executive Director of the National Academy of Design, and I am happy to welcome you to Out of Many, a conversation series featuring National Academicians featured in our digital annual exhibition, E Pluribus, Out of Many, curated by Dr. Kelli Morgan. As many of you may know, the annual exhibition of National Academy of Design was a signature event of the Academy and held regularly from 1826, a year after the Academy itself was founded, until 2015. And it served as an annual snapshot of new work and ideas by artists and architects around the country. The idea to do a digital edition of the annual emerged about a year ago in fall 2020. The United States was entering what was then its second pandemic lockdown. It was in the final throes of a presidential election, and it had just emerged from a traumatic summer filled with protest and long overdue calls for change. How might an annual reveal how artists and architects were responding to all of this upheaval, and what impact was it having on how they approached their work? And in turn, how might that help us understand and think about what was happening in our country? Framed by Dr. Morgan's prompt for the show, E Pluribus features the work of over 100 National Academicians and asks the question, what new futures can be created if Americans stop pursuing the ideal of national unity and instead accept our reality as an incongruent collective? I hope you have all had a chance to see the show by now. If you have not, please visit it online at outofmany.nationalacademy.org. And tonight we are thrilled to continue the conversation that show has began with the artist Fred Tomaselli in conversation with the National Academy's own recently appointed Chief Curator Sara Reisman, who I am thrilled to say has joined the staff of the Academy this past summer. Before I turn things over to Sara, please stick around after the conversation when we will have a live Q&A with Fred. You can drop questions at any point throughout this program into the Q&A function that is just down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can after the program. I also want to remind you that this series will continue every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. through November 30th, and you can get the full schedule of conversations and participants on our newly relaunched website at nationalacademy.org. So with that, I'm going to invite Sara onto the screen, and there she is, and it is my pleasure to turn it over to Sara Reisman, Chief Curator of the National Academy of Design.
Thanks so much, Greg. Thank you for that introduction. I'm so excited to be here for this conversation with Fred Tomaselli, whose work I've admired for a long, long time. I'm also really pleased to be part of this conversation series, responding to prompts that Dr. Kelli Morgan has formulated and curating the exhibition E Pluribus Out of Many. I also want to recognize the work of Adriana Lee Tarver and Angelique Owens, our programs team, for making this event happen. So thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Fred Tomaselli. I'll introduce you, Fred, and then if you want to join us after I read your bio, I think that would be perfect. Fred Tomaselli has shown his work in museums, biennials, and galleries around the world, including the Museum of Modern Art, Museum of Contemporary Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Biennials include the Whitney Biennial, Berlin Biennial, Lyon Biennial, Sydney Biennial, and Prospect One, New Orleans. Solo museum shows include the Whitney Museum at Philip Morris, Site Santa Fe, Albright Knox Gallery, Fruit Market Gallery, Irish Museum of Modern Art, the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth, Aspen Art Museum, Brooklyn Museum, Tang Teaching Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York, Orange County Art Museum, University of Michigan Art Museum, Toledo Art Museum, and Joslin Museum in Omaha, Nebraska. A native Californian, Tomaselli has lived in Brooklyn since 1985. His work is represented by White Cube, London, and James Cohan Gallery here in New York City. So welcome, Fred. Do you want to turn on your, there you are. It's great to see you. Great to see you.
Nice to see you.
So thanks for that song selection at the beginning, Death Party by the Gun Club. Don't know if that has any specific meaning or if we should talk about that later.
It's about the Republicans.
That's a great answer. So I know we'll spend some time talking about your recent New York Times works that you made during the lockdown over the past year, and that's part of a larger body of work that goes back to 2005. But before we get into the New York Times works, I kind of wanted to go back. This is a little bit selfish or self-centered, I should say. One of my first impressions of your work is your permanent public artwork, a percent per art project that you made for the Hall of Science in Flushing Meadows Park, installed in 1996. So that's called 10 kilometer radius. Maybe we can put that slide up and kind of talk from the sidelines. What I like about this piece, and it's just maybe I thought it was a good tie-in to the concept of out of many, e pluribus, out of many. This piece gives viewers multiple perspectives that radiate from a center point, which is the rotunda in the Hall of Science. So it's sort of about this collective, and you can see that they're kids looking through these kind of peepholes or portals. I'm just like, maybe you can talk us through the work, talk about what motivated you to make the work, and what was involved in collecting these different perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for that. The work was kind of like the last site-specific work I did before transitioning to making pictures, and it was a long, arduous process. But I still like it, and I still feel like that it speaks to many of the concerns that are at the heart of my work. Basically, the rotunda of the Queens Museum being circular in nature made me think of using that as a center point to plot a 10-kilometer radius circle on a map of New York. And I found that circle bisected every kind of neighborhood, ethnically, racially, socioeconomically, and also contained different parts of nature. And so what I did was I went and on this map, I gridded off 5-degree increments along the circumference of this imaginary circle, and then went to each and every location and photographed what was ever there. And then what I did was I took those photographs and I inserted them into these peepholes that are then backlit by the ambient light of the space, so that when you're looking at the peephole, you're looking at an image that is directly 10 kilometers away in a straight line. This is a little, what you're showing right now is a map that's on the wall made out of stainless steel. The center red dot is the Queens Hall of Science. And the radiant, the circular on the outer point has all the areas starting at north and then 5-degree increments. So I just basically, I was thinking a lot about Cagean dynamics and like the idea of like just using chance operatives to like bring me to whatever site was there and to photograph whatever I saw, and to try to talk about the city as, you know, the city as a place. Basically, I was thinking I was using, I was probably inspired very much photographically by the work of, say, Dan Graham and Walker Evans, and that they're very matter-of-fact photographs, but they give you a sense of it. Almost maybe, I guess it's the beginning of this idea of like my work as like art as a transportation vehicle. It shoots you out into the city or it brings the city back into the space. So so these are just a few of the spots that I happened to be. Like I was at 116 in Lenox and was able to, I photographed the, I think it was a Louis Farrakhan Mosque, the empty baby carriages in the old Williamsburg, where you don't have old baby carriages on the street anymore, a pool in Queens, and what I like to call the Cain and Abel house, also in Queens. So this is just a sample of the, I think, 80 odd, I don't know how many, 85 photographs are in this work.
You said it's like 5 degrees of separation each location. Right. And what did it reveal to you as you moved? I mean, it's you cast a wide net around the city. So I'm curious what you came across. This is in the early 90s, right? Because you would have, in the sort of timeline of a Percent for Art Commission, you would have been awarded the commission, say 1990, and you finished in 1996, something like
Right.
that.
And I did most of the photographs between, I think, 94 and 95. And the city was just coming out of a pretty hard crack epidemic. And there were still like signs of kind of urban decay in certain neighborhoods. And I was actually cautioned by people in the city to not show those photographs. But I said, hey, I had to go to that spot. That's what I saw. And so, and they did approve the project. But, and so we ended up getting the photographs in as I saw them. But it really brought, like, one of the sites like landed directly in the lobby of the Metropolitan Museum. Some of them, some of the, Tony neighborhoods like the Upper East Side got included in there, parts of Central Park, parts of Williamsburg, East New York, the Bronx. And what I did was I bicycled, subway road, and kayaked my way through the city. And what I got, it was kind of like a bit of an urban adventure. It got me outside of my comfort zone, got me into places that I wasn't normally accustomed to going to. And it just showed me this incredible diversity of the city, and which was sort of both lovely and not so lovely at the same time.
So, like, what I noticed in these photos, I don't see people. Did you avoid photographing people specifically because of what that might mean, or do some of the photos have kind of figures in them?
I shot people on my journey, but I felt a little funny about maybe invading their privacy, and didn't really want to get model releases, and kind of wanted to be just sort of a fly on the wall and look at the city as sculpture, and just look at the city as and try to suggest the life of the city through the objects, the things, the architecture and nature that was there. And so, if I had to do it all over again, maybe I would photograph people, but I'm kind of like, I'm a little, I'm shy that way. So yeah. I think this was in keeping with my nature.
So you said this was the last of your installation-based works, or maybe I misunderstand that, installation and to some extent participatory, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, it was running towards the end. I had been doing a lot of work that referred to our culture of escapism by using mostly tropes that came out of theme parks. I grew up in Orange County, really close to Disneyland, and that kind of artificial reality, I always kind of like, it was just the water I swam in. I didn't really understand how weird it was until I came to New York. But I wanted to make art about that, primarily because Ronald Reagan was president at that time. And and it seemed like that an actor portraying a president who was actually elected by the American people seemed like an absolute ascendancy of the unreal. And I didn't, in my wildest dreams, didn't think it could get any more meta than that. Although, then that guy came. And so I was thinking about, like, our culture of escapism and how it wasn't just, it was responsible for the shape I was in, because I too am a product of that. I too was immersed in drugs and theme parks and mall culture and cinema and all the other things that one can scramble or lose oneself in. But I also saw the nation as being equally, encumbered, I guess, by their inability to look at the world and see the world. And so I thought that there was something, art's not supposed to be escapist, right? I mean, good art is supposed to, like, give you, it's supposed to show you what's really there. And, And for me, escapism seemed to be the dominant export product of our country and seemed to be very much responsible for what the shape we were in. So I thought it would be interesting to explore that. And I have been continuing to explore that in my work since.
So if we go, there are a few more slides after this that are kind of 90s work. Maybe we can look at some of these. You mentioned when we spoke yesterday by phone, not by Zoom, and we weren't looking at specific works, but I was thinking about your comment about moving to sort of artwork that was not kind of tied to any sort of, it wasn't relational at a certain point, like you're making paintings and collages. Can you talk a little bit about this period of the 90s and maybe this work, Portrait of Laura, which has a few iterations out in the world?
Well, I mean, I might take issue a tiny bit with the idea that paintings aren't relational, because I really do feel that like there's this feedback loop between the viewer and the object that is inherently that. I mean, it isn't explicitly that, but that's part of the deal one enters into when one is looking at things. So, so just to get that aside,
I agree, and I agree with you.
I know. There's like levels of relational ability, and when a work of mine demands that a physical, like your part of your body enters into it, or that you enter into a darkened room or whatever, yeah, it's a whole other thing. But with this work that we're looking at here, Portrait of Laura, these were portraits that I did, a series of portraits that I did that were based on questionnaires where I would ask the sitter for their drug history and for their birth date. And they would fill out these questionnaires, and the birth date would correspond to an astrological symbol that would then correspond to an astronomical location in the sky.
Right,
and,
so like a star map, yeah.
But yeah, so in this case, Laura, who was born under the constellation of Sagittarius, I found the constellation, and then what I did in this case was I took pills and sugar and put them on photographic paper and worked in a dark room and exposed it to light and developed it as a photogram. And then I drew on it with her drug history. So it's a chemical celestial portrait, a portrait of inner space and outer space. And it was just a different way of talking about, I mean, our connection to the cosmic and how that cosmic lives inside of us, and trying to use like crazy, like random informational, or maybe even bogus information to sort of try to to talk about another person. Look, because I'm not really a believer in astrology, but I kind of like how it systemizes that kind of this idea of the self.
I mean, I think what I like about this is it's almost like data points, but more importantly, I think this was in an exhibition I curated 4 or 5 years ago called "In the Power of Your Care," which was a group show at the Rubin Foundation focused on the idea like health and healthcare as a human right, interdependencies of care in our culture, and these works I think were interesting to me because I think of like the exposure of what somebody's chemistry is, like the sort of decisions made in terms of drug use or medical, like sort of medical history seems somehow private. So I like the idea that these portraits normalize that or make it sort of like destigmatize. And maybe that's just my own hang up.
No, I think that's really interesting. I mean, it's also dependent on like the person's, both their honesty about what they choose to allow to be public knowledge, but also their memories, because we are an amalgamation of prescriptions at a certain point in this culture. And I don't know if we can remember everything that we've consumed. But anyway, yeah. So that was what I would. There was one. I think this piece was part of a larger show where I took 12 different portraits of people born under different houses of the zodiac, and then had them hung salon style. So it was like a chopped up night sky. It kind of looked good together.
That sounds beautiful. You used the expression at some point when we were talking yesterday about perceptual modifiers, and this kind of the corollary between the logic of chemistry and the cosmos. I'm quoting you, so these aren't
Okay, I must have said it then.
yeah, no, it's a nice. So I think it's like this. Again, it's a window. We're talking about like out of many. Just to bring it back to the theme of the digital annual. This gives us a window to another reality, to someone else's reality, even though that reality might not even be perceptible all at once, right? I mean,
Right.
also a history. So
it's the inside, and
yeah.
it's so much of, and the outside that's so vast and out and away from us that we can't see either.
Yeah.
You know, when we see the person, right? It's just a different way of getting to another, and they all look a little different from each other. They're all individuated, which is funny, even though the same logic, you know, kind of progresses in each object.
Was anyone resistant to participating? I'm not asking who. Or to filling
yeah,
up.
there were some people that wanted to make sure. No, I don't know. There were people that wanted to make sure that I wouldn't like tell anybody who they really were, and I promised to only use first names. So that kind of keeps it a little bit on the anonymous side. But you know, there's a birth date there, so you could probably figure out some people if you really, you know, wanted to really sleuth it, I suppose.
You kind of have to know, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. You have to know who my friends are.
Yeah. So somehow that the window to another reality leads us maybe to some of the next images. And here we can advance the slide. We have, well, these are some other works. I don't know if you want to talk about these, but these do use pills, but then we start to get into kind of more optical collage.
Yeah. No, I mean, with the work that I did with drugs and reality, well, with pills and reality modifying substances and reality modifying plant material. I mean, at that point I wanted, you know, this idea, I was, you know, I really, you know, I had gone to school as a painter and I abandoned my entire practice because of the burden of history. I was really a lot more turned on to performative work and installation work and new media. I just didn't really know what a painting could do or how to make a painting. And so I kind of tentatively found my way back to making these bricolages or collages that referred to paintings. And I also was able to, I had all these painterly skills and I was able to like bring them back into this work. But what I was thinking of at the time was the use value of an object. Like, how do people use paintings? Like, what is their historical use? And I started thinking about the, you know, pre-modernist ideal of paintings as windows to other realities. And this idea of losing yourself in this other world that's depicted in the painting. And, you know, notions around transcendence and the sublime are certainly part of that. And when I started thinking about like paintings as transportational vehicles, the rhetoric around both that and psychedelic drugs seemed like insanely, it just seemed really apt. It seemed like they were just like, they were talking about, either one was talking about the other. So, I started inserting drugs into the work in a way to rearrange their use values. So instead of the chemicals of the drugs going up through your bloodstream and altering consciousness, they travel through the eyeballs. So it's a different route to altering perception. And I guess I felt that like these things, I could just fix this water-soluble ephemeral material in this surfboard resin that I had been using since I was a kid, and that these objects could be used over and over again for every person that saw it, and every person that saw it could like lock up with the work and hopefully have their perceptions modified.
But it's like extending the experience, I guess, then of the perceptual modifier, like from that of like something very temporal to something much longer term. something more delicate.
Yeah. I mean, these pills are, hopefully still going to be there forever, or these leaves, and like, they're all really pretty fragile, but like I figured out a way to kind of hold them in like amber, and to allow them to just sort of do their work forever, on whoever happens to walk by.
So let's go to the next slides that are from New York Times, and we'll start here. And when we first talked about getting together tonight and doing this talk, it was like, let's have like 3 to 5 slides from each, from 2 series, but then maybe we can go through these slides and then come back to the beginning of the series, just to give viewers, like, if we can stop for a couple of seconds on each one and kind of take in the archive that emerges here.
Yes. Well, should I just like let them go and not say anything?
I think you're welcome. This is your platform. I think, I guess I just wanted these to be seen by people tuning in and watching this, because it's making a lot of beauty out of what was a very difficult time. So, and I like, it's kind of interesting. There's the image of Grand Central that's empty, and it's this kind of moment of, I don't know, just desertion, right? I'll stop and we can wait to get through them and then go back. But maybe start with the question of, what was going on with you at the beginning of the pandemic? How did you get to these new collages, if we're calling them new? I mean, they're still,
well, well, what happened was I was working on a show that was supposed to open at James Cohan Gallery in May of 2020. And we were working pretty hard trying to finish up the work. And what they were was, I had thought I had abandoned the New York Times series. Like, as you said earlier, I had been doing this series off and on since 2005. And what I had gone on to do since then is take text from the Times and merge it with my painterly practice. And in that regard, I was thinking about trying to, I was trying to make sense about the sort of the wonder of being alive and the beauty of this sort of world that we live in, and my own luck and good fortune at being an artist in all of this. And that's generally pretty optimistic, I think, and somewhat joyful. But then meanwhile, like before the pandemic, there was this emergency going on, with democracy almost falling apart, and a bunch of other horrible things, kids being put into cages. We all know what happened. And I was freaking out, and basically I was in my studio, this nice serene envelope, and meanwhile, like listening to NPR or whatever, and they sort of like the outer world was penetrating the inner world. So I was trying to make sense out of that by making art out of the friction between the outer world outside of me that was falling apart with climate change and Trump, and then this inner world of of this kind of cosmic beauty in nature and the shape of nature. And what happened was the show got stopped, and my studio assistant went to Vermont, and then there was this lockdown order went into effect. So I moved my studio. I just moved some drawing materials and my printer, and I moved it to my house and set up my studio in a little 8 by 10 foot bedroom. And then the next thing I know, like every day in March, some new messed up thing was happening. And I was like, everybody, I think, in the world was, slowly freaking out. And found my way back to making this work that was more or less about the pandemic, where I was sort of like immersing myself in the horror of that moment and the horror of the news at that time, but also getting lost in the processes that making art, like getting lost in making art and having that experience of just being, with the work. And and having pleasure. So it was this complicated, it wasn't dissimilar to what was happening in my other larger paintings that I was working on. And so like March was really intense, like every single day was an earth-shattering revelation. So March took up, there was a lot of time spent working through March and trying to figure out what these works were about and how I was going to address them and how I would address the images. And one of the things I ended up doing was I ended up blowing up the images to be pretty much full page. So that was kind of a new thing. And then in many cases, rearranging the text, but they were always from that front page. And then just sort of working my way through the pandemic. So I spent most of the summer in this little room working on these drawings. And then when they were all done, they sort of felt like they fit with the larger paintings. So we included them in the show when it finally opened up in October.
And when you identify, you're looking at the front page, is there any criteria in terms of what you're looking for? Is it like the heavy headline or is it the image? I mean, because in some cases the images are largely obscured by pattern. Maybe we can slowly scroll through a few, and I don't know if there are any you want to talk about in particular.
Well, you know, I mean, I guess I sort of like found my way into what I was supposed to do with each thing through a really intuitive process that was pretty slow. Because I would run the original front page through a copier, through a printer scanner, I had an endless supply of the same front page of the New York Times. So and I would like start and maybe make a bunch of mistakes or go off in a wrong direction. And then I would shred it, but I would learn a little bit about, oh yeah, I like this, but I didn't like that. And then I would start again. And I just kept doing these sort of false starts until I kind of found my way, mostly kind of intuitively, to finding out what it was I wanted to make. And so in many cases, like in this work that we're looking at here with the butterfly, there's only 3 small butterflies that are made out of a map that are part of the underlying image, which is a map of New York that shows, a map of the United States that shows COVID outbreaks. And so I outlined them and turned them into butterfly shapes, but all the rest of it is just invented, you know, but it just sort of felt like that was somehow or another, this release of the bird, of these butterflies like flying through the air, I guess sort of dovetails with the headline insofar as like the pressure is, they're being released into the air. So, you know, I just sort of, I didn't even really think about it. It just sort of happened.
Well, this is even before people are clear. This is March 21st, 2020. At this moment, it wasn't clear. People were still trying to figure out, like a lot of us didn't have masks in the United States, right? At least in New York, right?
No, and I was like, basically, I wasn't riding the subway. I mean, it was kind of a really weird and dreamy time that was both kind of horrific, but I was also like, just sort of like, all of a sudden it was like back, I felt like I was in high school or early college, like just working in a little bedroom, just, you know, the phone wasn't ringing, you know, like everybody was like shut inside, business was stopped. And, you know, I'm lucky enough to live in a house with a backyard. So I would occasionally go out to the backyard and work in the garden and watch the birds come flying through. I mean, March was migration season, the beginning of the migration season. So like I did a lot of like, I would go out and just bird in my backyard or ride my bike to the park and look at birds and go back and work some more, fix some stuff around the house, go back upstairs. My wife is a great cook. So I was like eating, I don't know, it was kind of great and kind of horrible at the same time. But I was just trying to, trying to make sense out of all of that, out of what was happening. And I don't know if I ever did, but I was trying.
And in a way, that kind of contradiction of the sort of small pleasures of life with this kind of anxiety. I mean, I think that's in a way the definition of trauma, or the effect of trauma. There's a kind of, when you're in it, you have to appreciate these moments, right? So it's even seeing the beauty in the cover of the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess you're so kind of right. I mean, I think that this body of work that, like I said, I wasn't initially that I wasn't really going to show or do. Like I had thought I'd stop doing it. You know, I mean, it was a form of self-soothing. You know what I mean? It was like somehow I was paying attention to the outside world and all of its horrificness, but also paying attention to my own sensibilities as an artist and the pleasure of being an artist. And so I guess it was a big coping strategy, you know, I mean, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, I could still feel the shock of hearing that and knowing what that meant and knowing how that was going to go. And I just thought to myself, like, you know, I mean, we have this pandemic, we have global warming, we have a madman running the country, democracy's at ruin, at risk, and now this. It was just almost too much to bear.
Yeah.
But here we are.
It really was.
We're bearing it.
I mean, I think what's interesting just in the sequence, having seen the portrait of Laura, there is a nice correspondence with this in terms of like the sky. I don't know the original, what's the original background for Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the
I'll tell you this, it was smaller.
Uh-huh.
I blew her up, and then I took the ornament from her jacket that she's wearing in the photograph, and then blew those up with the copy scanner. So everything you see, all these little squares and and little flower patterns, they're all coming from her brooch. They're all coming from the outfit that she's wearing. So in this case, I didn't feel like I was in such a state of mourning. I didn't feel like there should be any color in this work, in this particular, like it was about a sense of mourning for me. So I wanted to put that out there. And so that's how that happened.
So in thinking about this group of works, it does read like an archive of the time. Do you think these are best seen together, individually? And you kind of touched on this. To what extent is this about the work being made versus experienced by or received by the viewer? Because you talked about the pleasure of making the work.
Yeah.
The focus. But I think like just the question of, are they best seen together? Can they exist on their own? It's kind of a market question, I suppose.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's kind of a market question, I suppose, right? Like, can they experience, is it enough to experience them one-off, individually, or do you see them as in sequence?
I thought that they, like I chose, initially, it was my thought that they should all be hung together in one room at the show at James Cohan and Jim. And so we tried that out, and Jim was like, you know, can we try it my way? And so what he did was he broke them apart and interspersed large resin hybrid paintings with a few of these New York Times. And so what it did was it really firmly integrated them as individual works within a larger, you know, with my other the larger paintings in the show. And I think that was like really instructive in that they really did seem to be able to survive on their own, you know, as individual objects. But I did like having them all together in one show, you know, and I did like having them speak in a slightly different cadence from what the paintings were doing. but I felt like they were all about the same thing, even though the paintings had been worked on for a couple of years prior to the show, and that the New York Times works were the most recent part of the show. They felt like they were all of a piece. They all felt very integrated together. So yeah, they can be taken apart and individuated, which is exactly what happened.
Right. And this is sort of goes back to some of what you were saying before about reality or lack thereof. Can art, or your artwork in particular, help keep us more connected to truth, grounded in facts? Do you think that's a function of art, or is it to take us away, if that makes sense? Like to take us away
Well,
from—
I don't know. I mean, I think art, art is short for artifice. I mean, what we are doing as artists are creating sort of, I guess, a kind of, they're not really exactly the same as fictions, but they're very subjective. They're really about the sensibility of the person who's making the work. And that might be true for them. But I don't necessarily know if that's like facts in the way that maybe I tend to think of facts. Right. And I don't know if I think that the newspaper's facts the way we like to think of facts either. Newspapers or news organizations choose what to spotlight and hide what they don't think is important. And it's a very subjective way of bracketing or framing reality. And sometimes the factualness of news turns out to be not factual. Right. It turns out to be another bunch of lies, or it turns out to be propaganda. And I've always had a complicated relationship with news. I consume it. I read the Times as I do, like the guy who read the Guardian, I read the Post, and I read like left-wing stuff. And I even pay attention to some right-wing stuff just to see what the other side's all about. And, they're all talking about the same thing, and they're all talking about it slightly differently. And so I don't even know if there are any facts in this. I mean, there are, but how to separate the facts from the fictions? It's hard to know. And maybe that's part of the project.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking this doesn't really figure into your work, but there's some artists like Pablo Helguera or Jimbo Blatchley who've made projects out of, kind of made narratives out of history and then fictionalized them. So there's that kind of distortion. And then, I mean, in a funny way, I think now there's a deeper sense of responsibility or accountability about what's being, like, is truth being told? How is it presented? Whose history is it, right?
Yeah.
I guess maybe then a larger question is what role art can play. And you started to talk about this in relation to pre-modern art, more spiritual art in the collective earlier in our conversation. But I guess I wonder what function it can have, if it has a function. Is function too heavy a term?
Well, I mean, okay, newspapers are a product of this sort of collectivity of the newsroom, right? I mean, it's an amalgamation of fact checkers and writers and photographers, editors, if I didn't say that already, that all come together to present this thing, and then it goes out. The thing that I like about print media is at a certain point, they have to decide this is the most important stuff, right. And boom, and then it fixes that day, and that day resonates on that page, right? And whereas websites are constantly being updated and changing, they're constantly dynamic, right? But there's a certain kind of, I don't know, a sort of like, it's just this quick stop, this is the day, boom. And so, and this idea of the collective is important to me as a collagist, because I have been for, 30 years or so working with the imagery of others. I too am kind of a conductor of a sample choir of other makers, all these photographers and illustrators that I, borrow from or use in my work. It's another form of a collective. And then there's this collective of the unknown viewer and how they're going to respond, you know? So like my work is made for me, but it's also a product of a lot of other people, you know, that they're at the heart of the images that I use. I mean, one of the fun things about this project, the New York Times project in particular, is that the original photographer I always keep their byline at the bottom. So I get to give some credit where credit is due, you know. But you know, I have a lot of questions, like, I don't know how these works are going to look over time. Like, I fixed time this day on the wall, and it's going to resonate as an art object forever. And this like, you know, September 19th, 2020, somebody has that image, and it's just going to be on there. I'm curious to know what they might look like in the future. I mean, in many ways, it's not dissimilar to the photographs that you showed at 10-kilometer radius that I was showing. Those two are fixing a moment in time, and the city has changed a lot since then. So I thought at one point, that 10-kilometer radius might be a weird time capsule, you know, for New York in the, you know, ye olden times in the 1990s, you know. So I don't know how these are going to look, but time has always been a big concern of mine, and it's anyway, it hit this thing seems to hit all my buttons, you know, like it's an archive. The paper it's you know, acidic, and it'll get brittle and yellow over time. I get to fix it. You know, there's a whole lot of things. I have this large archive of drugs and leaves and, you know, photographic images in my slide cabinet. It's sort of part. It fits really well with my general oeuvre, if you will.
So two questions wrapped into one, and maybe it's my final kind of question in this part of the conversation is, if you can talk a little bit about what you're working on now. I mean, if it's different than this series, and or if you can comment on, you know, what you're reading, what's in your mind in terms, I mean, you're obviously reading the New York Times heavily, but thinking like, what is, you know, what's informing your point of view? I think that is helpful for people to hear, because there's, you know, the artwork is kind of a, like you said, it's a moment in time. It's a snapshot of this history, but you know, like your mind is more active than the image, right?
Yeah, I would hope so. I don't know. I mean, I just got done earlier this year watching the 6-part Adam Curtis film, Can't Get You Out of My Head, which you know, basically talks about ideology and how it morphs in the mind of the individual, and how the individual changes mass ideology, and those ideas about individuality and the collective around ideology. About that friction has always been really fascinating to me, and I think he's done a particularly interesting job of kind of using film as collage, and he's quite great, I think. In terms of what I've been doing lately, I don't know.
Studio view.
I'll give you a studio view. Let me see. There's a painting. That's like 5 by 5. We'll zoom in. Let me see here. Let's see if I can do this.
You're doing it.
Doing it. Yeah, you're getting like getting a bird's eye view. Yeah. So that's and this, I think, sort of shows what I was talking about earlier. This idea of like having the text kind of like be part of the piece. And here's another one. This, I shouldn't even show this. I don't even know what I think, but I was watching a lot of bear cam videos at a certain point.
Bear cam videos are videos.
Yeah, live bear cams of bears eating salmon.
Wow.
And in Alaska. And so I thought I'd make a work about that form of escapism. I never did a bear before. I don't know I don't know what we're seeing, but anyway, but I got to involve, like, I like fly fishing and surfing, which I've been doing a lot lately with the fall swells. So, or actually boogie boarding. And so I got to incorporate all the things I love to do in that. So that's what I've been working on. Plus I've been working on, this is a show I'm working on for, I'll just give you a quick rundown. This is a show that, a part of a show that's going to be here. Oh yeah, here's one. This is one I like. Yeah, like that.
So about climate change, yeah.
Yeah, and what I'm doing, this is a new body of work that I'm going to be showing at White Cube, London, on an online show. The new thing with this is that I'm taking images, and I used to only work above the fold, so to speak. And now I'm taking the whole front page and rearranging it and skewing it in any way I want, and taking sort of like the lower news, the news below the page that is not considered as important, and blowing those images up and making those and turning those into the banner headlines. Like this one, for instance. This was not the front page. Let's see. This was not the front page above the fold that day, right? But below the fold it was, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I'm flipping things around and expanding it, but the rule still is whatever was on the front page, that has to be source material in the work. So the text or the image, whatever I decide to use, that has to be part of that front page.
And does the front, whatever the date of the front page is, are you working kind of in sequence? I meant to ask this earlier, but you have, do you put things aside and come back to them? Is it important that you make the work within a certain window of time?
It's not so important that I make certain works in the window of time. What's problematic for me is I can't bang these things out in a day. And so I can't, so what happens is the news just piles up, and while I'm working, and it usually takes me, believe it or not, takes me at least a week to make one of these things, usually because of all the trial and error and the meticulousness and the slowness of my process. And so what happens is I'll have other works that I want to get to, but meanwhile, I got to finish the one I'm working on. And I'm just a slowpoke, and so I get them done. And then, but meanwhile, I'm looking at the other ones and considering the other ones. So I'm already, like, in my brain, I'm already working on these other things contemporaneously with the events. And so sometimes it's good to, like the Ruth Bader Ginsburg one, I didn't get to till a couple of weeks after, but I just pinned it up on the wall, and I just looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. So that was like probably the most direct and the fastest one to make in a funny way, because I had already, in my mind, I'd already made and remade it many times. I should actually probably do that more as a matter of course, instead of, like, I don't know, wasting all this paper along the way. But I remade the Ruth Bader Ginsburg piece a half a dozen times or so at least. And then when I finally got to it, that was one of the few ones that was super direct. With all the other ones, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just sort of, I'm working with evanescent impulses that are mysterious. I don't know, and in many cases, why certain images get handled the way they do. I just know that it feels right or it doesn't feel right.
But I like the idea that you have, it might take a few attempts to address the image how you want to, so that you have different versions work, at the same time. But you said something, it's like in your statement within the exhibition, digital annual, you said something about collage and the news, and it's your way of talking back. Or
yeah, it is. It is. I mean, maybe it's my, like, my, kind of punk rock, fuck you attitude that I, kind of grew up with. But, it is a way of I mean, maybe I wouldn't call them like letters to the editor or anything like that, but they are a way, like, I get to be another voice inside this collectivist enterprise. I get to, in many cases, have the last word. I get to talk back to the media, and I get to sort of like impose another reality on top of this other, in top of what purports to be reality, you know. And I should, you know, I should also say that, you know, by and large, you know, I think, you know, news organizations, the good ones at least, you know, I know that they're trying their best to defend the truth and defend democracy. I don't think that I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but you know, I do think that they're trying to get it right. You know, at least the people I know in news organizations. I don't think that there is a massive conspiracy. I mean, other than Sinclair News and Fox, but you know, and so I am sympathetic, you know, and I do believe that, you know, that without a healthy news organization working in the world, our democracy would be even more imperiled. And it's no coincidence that Trump went after the media, and because he understood that they had a lot of power to stop his anti-democratic agenda.
We do want to remind people, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We are happy to put them out to Fred and Sara. I was going to have a much smarter question, but when you showed the bear painting and talked about the bear cams and talked about escapism, which was a theme that you opened with, I wanted to throw that out. What were your forms of escapism during this period, other than bear camp videos, let's say?
Well, I mean, you know, it was like going to the beach. That seems safe.
Yeah.
You know, being outdoors, going into the garden, riding my bicycle, you know, and making art and listening to music, you know, or listening to podcasts. I mean, in many cases, and being with my family. I mean, I don't know if that was an escape. It was like maybe more reality, but yeah. that was, you know, like the world for me and for everybody else got pretty simple. You know, like there were no restaurants to go to, no bars to hang out in, no music venues, I mean, I haven't been to a movie theater since Parasite. You know, I miss going into the collectivist darkened room, and you know, and so that's what I did. You know, I drank a little bit, you know, smoked a little bit of pot, you know, but you know, nothing too terrible. So and went up to the Catskills a couple of times, but only for day trips, because like nobody wanted overnight guests, you know, because everybody was freaking out.
How did you feel? Were you missing the sort of business of being an artist, like having the sort of cycle of openings and events and flying around, or did you appreciate getting time to step away from that?
Oh, I didn't miss that part of the art.
Yeah,
I don't care that much about the art world. I like art. I mean, I love going to shows. And it's so great to go to shows again. I mean, like that was one of the kind of really interesting things about having that show, my show in October, was that it was one of the few parts of culture in New York that were back, and you know, and I felt like, oh hey, I'm doing my bit here, you know, where we can have a little bit of culture. We can have a reason to have a city. You know, a city is about culture, you know, and so for me, that was really thrilling to go to other art shows and see art again. And I love that. And I mean, I just was at Chelsea a couple of weekends ago. It was so amazing. There's so many good shows up. I was so excited, and it made me feel so happy to live in New York. So, but I didn't miss the business of it, of the art world, and I don't miss the other stuff about it at all. I really loved like for a while there, not having a studio assistant and just being by myself and being in my little tiny 8 by 10 foot bedroom and doing my little tiny drawings. Like for me, it was like, I was having more fun than I deserved to have under such horrible circumstances. I hate that.
The one other question that had come up was with the New York Times series, which I recognize dates back much before this period, but did you ever have any thought about engaging with other media in this way? Any other?
That's a good question.
Well, not really, insofar as like, that's the thing that comes to my house every day. And just like when I started making the drug work, it's like the drugs that were laying around my house were just the stuff of my life. I would just, get high and do stuff, or, had a headache, takes a pill or whatever. And it's a pretty prosaic, quotidian sort of things. These are the things that just are part of my life. Like I take less drugs now because, I'm a dad and, I'm a productive member of society. And I just don't have the stamina for drugs like I once did. But I still read the paper every day, and I still get it delivered to my house every day. And there's this ready-made there's this thing that is crying out for intervention that just comes to my and it's like, it's like a gift. Every day a new thing comes, and it's like not everything speaks to me, you know what I mean? Like I'm pretty selective about what I choose to use. And like if I don't get a vibe, I just don't use it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so it's that thing that comes every day that I love about it. It's dailiness. So I mean, I get like Harper's, I get the New Yorker, I get Bomb magazine, I get a lot of Art Forum, I get a lot of things that come at me, but the New York Times seems to be the thing that gets everything going at once. I don't know. I don't read the Post, so I mean the New York Post.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have any last questions? And looks like the audience, we've gotten through the audience questions. Any?
Yeah, it's fairly quiet. I guess there's just, I like thinking about your point, Fred, about intellect and intuition, that kind of this as a spectrum of, I don't know, it seems like that's something happening in your work, that you're working through these two. Are they impulses? I don't know if that's correct to say, but that they're two.
One's more of an impulse. I mean, between the cerebral and the intuitive.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like my work kind of got started. It's really, I think initially my work was all built on doubt. Like what can a painting accomplish? Are paintings even relevant? And all the tertiary arguments around pictures and what they meant. And my initial work was about addressing, at least the pictures, was about addressing that doubt and having, and sort of working that out in public, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And all that self-consciousness, I guess, initially came through my exposure, I guess, or my belief in conceptual art, and this idea that I thought I could maybe think my way out of the dilemma that I was in about, it's just the whole thing, like, like are paintings just like, objects of late capitalist consumerism, I mean, what does that mean? It's like, where, these sort of wealthy get to control the means of production. Like there was a whole host of like sociopolitical and economic, issues that I had that I was trying to address. Just the commodity aspect of paintings was freaking me out. That's maybe one of the reasons why I did site-specific work. But all that, that conceptualism sort of like did box me in. And the only way I could get out of that box was to take a leap of faith, you know what I mean? And to like go out on intuition. Like that's where I found like where the art really happened, was in the places where I maybe wasn't thinking so much, you know, and even though my work is predicated on a series of ideas, the actual making of the object is not idea driven at all. I don't know if that's at all different from the formalistic qualities of my work, where I think I sometimes put enemy-isms together in the same piece, like the hard facts of the news against like geometric, abstract, and psychedelic or trippier forms. The way I like to think about like pre-modernist history, but postmodernist history, and then classical modernist history. Like I don't mind like letting all that ideology and all those isms battle it out in my work. And my polarity between intuition and intellect is just another aspect of that.
Great. Okay. It looks like there are no further questions. If there are any, drop them in now. Last chance. I'm gonna wrap up with just two pieces of business. First of all, thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. If you would like to support the National Academy of Design and its programs, please visit our website, nationalacademy.org. I believe a link will drop into the chat for that. And a final reminder that this series continues every Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. I hope you will join us next week when Sara will be in conversation with artist Roberto Juarez. You can see the full schedule also at the website, nationalacademy.org, and RSVPs for all of the programs are now open. With that, Fred, Sara, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Great to see you, Fred.
Good night.